For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, before the Dark Times.
Welcome to the Foot and Friends on Film podcast, discussing everything about cinema. Now here's your host, Nick Baylor.
Hello there.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Welcome to the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com, where we discuss everything about cinema. I'm your host, Nick Mailer. On today's episode, this is the podcast you're looking for. John and I are going to talk about Star Wars. Happy May the 4th, everyone. We're going to go through the entire franchise. John's got a lot to say, and so do I. So take your seats, grab your popcorn. It's time for your feature presentation. As mentioned, we are the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com, where our motto is, any film you haven't seen is a new experience. Not much else to say. We're talking about Star Wars today. You guys know the drill, so without further ado, please welcome John H. Foote. So, Ron Howard told a story about being on the set of American Graffiti and asking George Lucas what he was working on. And Lucas responded by saying he had an idea for sort of a space opera type deal inspired by the old Flash Gordon serials, but employing the special effects of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is what would eventually become Star Wars, which was released in 1977. I want to ask you, what was the atmosphere like prior to seeing the film, prior to release? Was there massive hype? Like, did anyone see what was coming? What was it like being
No, not really. I mean, everybody had heard about it. We'd seen the trailers. Um, but American cinema at that time was still, very dark. All the President's Men, Network, Taxi Driver, those were the major films of the previous year. And 77 was pretty much the same. Looking for Mr. Goodbar had come out by that point, Slapshot. Um, Everything was still very, very dark. Rocky had kind of given a feel-good sense in 1976, but Star Wars was completely unexpected, and you could feel it. It was like a seismic shift in the American movie culture when it opened. And I saw it the first day it opened, and remember like it was yesterday, sitting in the theater, and you see the smaller ship running away from the big ship, and then you see the big ship start at the top of the screen, and it just kept going. It was absolutely massive. And we'd never seen anything like the Star Destroyer before. We'd never seen anything that big. We'd never seen anything that magnificently designed. And you mentioned the effects being like Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Absolutely true. I mean, the effects were magnificent. Even the opening credits of Star Wars were spectacular. You know, that burst of music from John Williams and then the title crawl. That was all very new, to us anyway, to this generation. And then, the lines around the block started and repeat business started. People were going more than once. I went more than once the summer of 77. I think I saw it 4 or 5 times. And you got hooked in the story. You got hooked in the fantasy. That opening sentence, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You kind of go, what? And then boom. And in its own way, it's a different type of Once Upon a Time. It's a Once Upon a Time for big kids. And Star Wars at its core, at its essence, is a Western in space. Good guys versus bad guys. It couldn't be more basic. And yet the bad guy is Darth Vader, dressed in black, talking in that deep, deep voice. And Luke Skywalker is a wide-eyed innocent who is trained by a Jedi master, played by Alec Guinness, to go to war against the Empire. And it moved with such breathtaking speed. It was exciting. It was interesting. And critics were falling over themselves trying to find new superlatives to describe the film, when really all they had to call it was a Western in space, and they'd have got it, and everybody would have got it. But the culture shifted. It kicked ass. It made a fortune. Um, was an instant success, an instant classic. It changed everything about movie making. It changed everything about movie going in that sense, and altered the course of George Lucas's career completely. At the end of the year, there was a sense that the Academy would ignore the film and nominate it for, visual effects, sound effects. But 10 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director and Supporting Actor for Alec Guinness. The three young actors in the film, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford, were instantly superstars, instantly household words. And so much of Star Wars entered into the lexicon of the American language. May the force be with you, and so many other things. Just it impacted everything about movies.
You mentioned the John Williams music, and I love the score to the Star Wars films. It's definitely one of my top 5 favorite film scores, a lot of which are John Williams, because he's done so many great and iconic film scores. And you think about the Imperial March, that bum, 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 but
Yeah.
and everybody knows that music just intrinsically. And John Williams has stayed with it to this day. He's done 9 films now.
And I think John Williams is prolific. I mean, everybody talks about Woody Allen writing a movie a year and directing it's 1, sometimes 2 a year. John Williams, I don't understand music. I don't know how somebody can sit down and compose music, and not just the score, but the strings and the horns and the drums, and to put all that together. And he's done it for so many films and for so many iconic films. And he has so many musical scores that are instantly recognizable, like Star Wars, Superman, Close Encounters, Jaws, Harry Potter, Schindler's List. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And the man's a genius. He's a national treasure. He was last year's winner of the American Film Institute Award for Lifetime Achievement, the first time a non-actor or director had been given the award. And Star Wars would not be Star Wars without his music.
Talking about the special effects, obviously George Lucas was standing on the shoulders of giants after the release of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, but the creation of Industrial Light and Magic, one of the biggest visual effects studio in Hollywood, which to this day is responsible for all the big special effects movies. Had you seen, aside from 2001, like what kind of things did you see when you saw Star Wars the first time that really blew you away, other than the big space scenes and the ships? What was new and exciting?
God, where to start? The jump to hyperspace was extraordinary. The creatures, and not just the ones in costumes, but that magnificent hologram chess game that Chewbacca is playing with Luke on the ship for the first time. The
Yeah.
sword fights, just everything about it was big and different. He absolutely plunged you into a world that had existed for centuries, obviously. The ships, none of the ships were gleaming and brand new. They were beat up. The Millennium Falcon looks like a hunk of junk
Yeah.
and is called a hunk of junk more than once over the course of the movie. So he gave you a world that was very lived in. And in doing it, he paid homage to so many films. One of the best shots in the movie is where Luke comes home to find his aunt and uncle slaughtered. That's right out of The Searchers. And
Right.
there's a shot where he's looking off to the 2 moons. And there's a shot in The Searchers where John Wayne sees the inferno of the house down below and pulls his rifle out of the scabbard, and it closes in his face, and you see the rage. I mean, that's the same exact shot. There were just so many things about Star Wars that paid homage to the older films. You mentioned the Flash Gordon serial, absolutely, but also a lot of originality. A lot of the creatures were brand new. The effects, everything was created for this movie. When he showed his good friends Brian De Palma, Martin Scorsese, and Steven Spielberg a first cut of Star Wars, the effects weren't completed yet. So for the all of the space fighting scenes, he cut in shots from Hell's Angels of the old biplanes during the First World War. And Brian De Palma was horrified. He said, "This is going to be the biggest piece of shit ever made, blah, blah, blah." Spielberg got it. Spielberg watched it and he said, "This is going to make $200 million." because he knew what Lucas was working on, and he trusted Lucas's imagination. ILM did indeed create all of the effects, and all the effects were created by artists within ILM. But every one of those effects came from the imagination of George Lucas. He sat down with him, he storyboarded what he want, he drew what he want quite often. All of it came from him, every single bit of it. And what they couldn't do, they found a way to do. They created it. They used miniatures. They used matte paintings. They broke all the rules because they decided there were no rules for this type of movie. They were going to make something brand spanking new. And kudos for Alan Ladd, the head of 20th Century Fox, for trusting George Lucas, because the board of directors were saying, what the hell is this guy doing? He's spending all kinds of money. What's going on? Blah, blah, blah. And Alan Ladd, chill out, boys. He made American Graffiti. He knows what he's doing. Leave him alone. And he trusted him. And Lucas went over budget on Star Wars, and he wasn't supposed to. And he did. And yet, Ladd trusted him. Ladd continued to make the movie.
Something that was interesting about Star Wars and is responsible for George Lucas's, considerable wealth was that Lucas retains the vast majority of merchandising rights, which is something that wasn't really a big deal for films prior to that, right? The idea of toys and merchandise.
No, it wasn't. And he was brilliant. And not just a bit of it, Nick. He retained all of it.
100%.
All of it. Yeah. He negotiated that. He took a lower salary. He took lower points. Still was a multimillionaire off his salary and points. But he took 100% of merchandising profits from Star Wars. And that alone earned him nearly $1 billion. I mean, you go with the dolls and the toys and the action figures, but then there were Star Wars pajamas, a soundtrack album, the novelization, Star Wars t-shirts, clothes, hats. It was madness. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing something to do with Star Wars. And even if it was just the logo, the Star Wars logo, he got that. That was his contribution. He got money for that. So 100% of the merchandising came to George Lucas. So when it came time to make The Empire Strikes Back, he didn't have to go to 20th Century Fox. He could do what he'd always wanted to do. He could make the movie on his own. And he allowed 20th Century Fox to distribute it, but he retained 90% of the profit this time. And 20th Century Fox got 10% on the second film. The first Star Wars, I think he got $500,000 to write and direct it. And that could be generous, plus points. But it was the merchandising that made him obscenely wealthy. And then he created Industrial Light and Magic, and that also added to his enormous wealth. And Skywalker Ranch, where most of his films and many, many other films are edited.
And you think about the merchandising, how it's grown. There are Darth Vader, Mr. Potato Heads, and Star Wars Monopoly, and I'm just looking at I'm sitting next to my guitar rack here, and I've seen a bass shaped like the Millennium Falcon. And it's like, this is the Rebel bass. And just, there isn't anything you can't buy with a Star Wars logo on it. It's really ubiquitous and everywhere.
Yeah, you can get surfboards with Star Wars. You can buy a set of drums that are Star Wars. You can buy little girl ballet shoes with Princess Leia on them. I mean, it's almost obscene that it's everywhere. But it's also quite brilliant that it's everywhere. I mean, he didn't leave an avenue untouched for Star Wars. It's everywhere, and it still is. It still is.
I'm reminded of Gene Simmons, something he said about Kiss, his band. He said, "I don't want a rock and roll band. I want a rock and roll brand." And much like Star Wars, you can get anything with a Kiss logo on it: a credit card, a coffin, this and that. And I guess no one after George Lucas had made that decision, made the same mistake. I guess no studio was going to make that mistake again of letting merchandising rights go to the filmmaker the way it did.
No, it had happened twice. John Travolta retained all the soundtrack rights for Saturday Night Fever and Grease. And it never happened again after Lucas. The companies realized, wow, we can make a lot of money here. We better sharpen up. And even with Lucas, they tried to muscle in on merchandising for Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And he threatened to take the movie to Warner Brothers or Paramount. He said, I can go anywhere else and they'll give me the deal I want. And he was right. He was right. The movie would make so much money that it didn't matter. It didn't matter if they're only getting 10%.
Let's talk about The Empire Strikes Back. Um, One of the great examples of a sequel surpassing its predecessor. George Lucas did not direct the film. It was directed by Irvin Kershner. Why didn't Lucas decide to helm it himself?
Lucas has never really wanted to be a director. He even in his university days with Francis Ford Coppola, he was very much an experimental director. You know, he wanted to make very strange movies that really nobody else but him would want to see. And he was always into gadgets, creating like ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, and the Dolby sound system he's created, things like that. He was really into creating new technology to make movies with. When it came time to do Empire, he had had such a horrible time making Star Wars. He didn't enjoy a minute of it, that he hired an old college professor, Irvin Kershner, to direct the film. He had taught Lucas film at UCLA, and he brought him in to direct the movie. He thought he was the perfect guy for it. He loved Star Wars. He believed in what Lucas was doing. And he was with Lucas at the Academy Awards the night Star Wars won 7 Academy Awards. And people forget that. People forget that Star Wars trampled all the competition at the Oscars in 1977. Annie Hall might have won Best Picture and Best Director, but Star Wars walked out of the building with 7 Academy Awards, which was enormous, absolutely enormous. So when The Empire Strikes Back was announced, and it was announced that Lucas wasn't going to direct it, there was a bit of panic, you know, from the fanboys and from 20th Century Fox. They thought, will it be the same film? Well, no, it was a different film. It was deeper. It was more complex. It was darker. It was richer. And it had greater epic sweep to it than Star Wars had. And it ended up being, as you say, a better film than the first one. And I remember sitting in the theater watching it and was mesmerized by the visuals. We start off on the ice planet Hoth, and from there we moved to Dagobah, where we're introduced to Yoda. And that was a whole, you know, strange happening meeting that little guy. And then we end up watching Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker duke it out with their lightsabers. And Vader's got that great line, I am your father. And you could have heard a pin drop in that movie theater. There was a gasp, and everybody gasped, including myself, and then not a sound as it resonated. And we realized, holy shit, this just took an incredible turn. And it was one of the best kept secrets of the movies that year. The critics didn't give it away. I read all the reviews and kept waiting for one. Somebody's going to blow it. Somebody's going to blow it. Nobody did. They all kept the secret, which is really good criticism, but also shows a respect for the storytelling and the narratives that Lucas was doing. And a much better film than the first one. And Star Wars was pretty fine. You know, it can't be denied. It was a pretty damn good movie. But The Empire Strikes Back is a better film. I dare say it's the best of the Star Wars franchise.
It is.
And yet, come Oscar time, 3 nominations. 3 nominations. And it was easily one of the best 5 films I saw of the year. Kershner's directorial achievement was easily one of the best 5 of that year. And the Academy treated it very shabbily.
What was it like being introduced to Yoda, famously puppeteered by Frank Oz, Miss Piggy?
It was incredible because he was such a unique creation. And there's a moment where I thought Yoda was going to be in the film for comic relief. And he's carrying on, he's raiding all Luke's stuff, eating his food. And then you think this guy's going to be hysterical. And then something happens and he goes calm and he speaks to another force that we realize is Obi-Wan. And he says he's not ready. And you go, oh my God, that's Yoda. That's the Jedi Master. It was completely unexpected, which is part of, I guess, the Jedi myth. Don't judge by size, don't judge by anything. You know, your opponent could always be quite formidable no matter what they look like. And look at Yoda. Who expects Yoda to be a fighting machine? And yet we watch him in Revenge of the Sith. He kicks ass in that. You know, it was quite exciting. And when I heard later that it was Frank Oz, I wasn't surprised because the man is a genius, despite the treatment Marlon Brando gave him on the score. And brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. Yoda was one of the most remarkable creations in movies.
I remember the first time I was unfortunately a product of my generation. I had not seen Star Wars until the trilogy special editions were re-released in 1997, and so this might upset some fanboys out there, but the first time I saw Star Wars, Greedo did shoot first, so I don't know how many people are retching at the thought of that. But I knew that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father. I had that spoiled for me in pop culture, probably on The Simpsons first, but I didn't know enough about Yoda, who Yoda was, and I remember I that was one of the genuine surprises I got to experience when I found out, oh, that's the Jedi Master. You're right; it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
And definitely,
yeah, it is. It is. And he's got such extraordinary power that we see. Luke is trying to raise rocks, I think, and Yoda lifts his starfighter out of the swamp,
yeah,
moves it over, puts it on the land, looks at him, and there you go. You just realize, wow, this guy's unbelievable.
yeah. Size matters not.
Yep, yep. And that's another thing, such a unique way of speaking. You know, his dialogue was so original, and we'd never heard anything like that before. And it was fascinating to listen to him. And unfortunately, they tried to do it again for another character, Jar Jar Binks, much, much later. And that was absolutely disastrous. But with Yoda, perfection.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that. So was the third entry in the series just an absolute given already by the time Empire was coming out?
Yeah, we knew it was a trilogy. We knew that there were going to be three. We didn't know how far apart they were going to be, but 2 to 3 years seemed reasonable given what it takes to make a Star Wars film. And initially, it was called Revenge of the Jedi,
Yes.
and there were posters up, and ads were starting for the movie. But then Lucas decided that a Jedi would not seek revenge, so he changed the title to Return of the Jedi. And those posters that say Revenge of the Jedi are apparently worth a fortune these days.
Yes, they are.
And I had one.
Oh my God.
I gave it away. I gave it away when they changed the title. It did not occur to me that it would be a collector's item ever. It just didn't occur to me. I gave it to a friend.
Wow. You still keep in touch with that friend?
Nope. Nope.
um, Obviously, Return of the Jedi is not as heralded as Empire. What was it like to see the third installment? We talked a little bit about it on some previous shows, but I know you hate those damn Ewoks.
I do, with a passion, But there's still a lot to like in the movie. Jabba the Hutt is extraordinary. I mean, what a creepy, disgusting creation he is. And that little creep that sits beside him with that annoying laugh, that was just equally annoying. And he's got the sculpture of Han Solo frozen in the carbonite on the wall, and Princess Leia dressed in just about nothing, chained up beside him. And Luke shows up, and you kind of wonder what Mark Hamill is playing. Has he suddenly become Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark? Because he's so dour and so down and so incredibly confident. And you think he's just going to kick everyone's ass, and the creature hits a button, and down he goes into the pit, and he's going to fight something that looks like it's going to tear him apart. And it doesn't. He wins and shocks everybody. And the early scenes in the movie, I think, are probably the best scenes in the movie. Once Han is restored, he's blind for quite some time. And really, I mean, it's kind of dull watching him run around blinded because he was such a great, interesting hero. Leia is the one that kills the bad guy. I can't think of his name.
Jabba.
Sorry?
Jabba the Hutt.
Jabba. There you go. Jabba the Hutt. Bit Alzheimer's here. It's Leia that kills. It's Leia that kills Jabba the Hutt, which is great when it happens. But then we land
out of his mouth while she chokes him. Yeah.
Oh, he's just disgusting.
Yeah.
And then we end up on the moon of Endor, and these little friggin' teddy bears show up. These little Ewoks, and they've got cute brown eyes, and they're fuzzy and they're cuddly, and yet they're also warriors. They're fearless and not afraid to fight. But the minute they showed up, all I could think of, by now I was out of university and had an understanding of the film industry. The minute they showed up, all I could think of was Toys R Us at Christmas time,
right,
lined lined with Ewok dolls. And I just thought, come on, Lucas, really? Really? Do you need the money that much? And it really ruined Return of the Jedi for me. They tie all the loose ends up nicely. Han and Leia get together as we expect. Luke is now a Jedi Master. Darth Vader turns on the Emperor and kills the Emperor, we think, and joins the ghosts of the good guys at the end of the film while they're celebrating. And it was critic proof by now. It didn't matter what the critics thought. It made a ton of money, and it was going to make a ton of money anyway. But critics were probably rough on Return of the Jedi in 1983. A guy named Richard Marquand directed the film. I don't remember him directing anything else. He probably did, but I don't remember his name at all. Don't know where he came from. Don't know where Lucas found him. I was very surprised Irvin Kershner didn't get the job. They tried to get David Cronenberg to direct it, and then they tried to get David Lynch, and mercifully both of them declined.
So skip ahead. As I mentioned, I saw the films during the 97 re-release, the special editions. And then by that time, there had been talk about the prequel trilogy coming out. I'm just going to throw it out there. You go in to see The Phantom Menace, and what the hell was that like?
I saw it at a press screening that was also going to have audience. And those are always a hit and miss experience, because a lot of them are people that have gotten their tickets from a newspaper competition. And the more I went to these things, the more I realized the same people were doing this. The same people go to free movies. They just keep sending in their name and they get them. A lot of familiar faces. But I was with the press, and I took a friend with me, and there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of anticipation in the air. But Peter Howell from the Toronto Star had seen a cut of it in New York and wrote kind of a negative review about it. He wasn't supposed to. He actually got in a lot of trouble for it because there was an embargo, and Fox takes their embargoes very seriously. If they tell me a movie's embargoed, I follow it to the letter. I don't even talk about the film. So I knew going in it might be a disappointment. I had no clue it would be so colossally disappointing. The character of Jar Jar Binks is probably the most annoying creation in the history of the movies. I cannot remember wanting to choke a character as much as I did that one. There's a scene in the movie where he's flicking his tongue, eating food, and Liam Neeson grabs his tongue. That's what when he did that, the audience roared and applauded, wanting more of it. He was just horribly upsetting to watch. The kid, Jake Thomas, the young guy that played Anakin Skywalker, had no charisma. Pardon?
Jake Lloyd? Am I wrong?
Jake Lloyd. I'm sorry, Jake Lloyd had no charisma whatsoever. None.
Yeah.
None. He was a bore. What it did have was a great performance from Ewan McGregor, who sounded like Alec Guinness, and continued that through the evolution of the trilogy that followed. Liam Neeson, I thought, cut a real heroic figure. He's a big guy.
Yeah.
And when he walks into a room with a cape, he looks instantly heroic. I thought he was terrific in his part. Wasn't sure what Natalie Portman was doing. And that continued for the rest of the series.
Yeah.
But it just, they start in the opening crawl, talk about tax credits and, the reason that this is all going wrong. And it was just, no, man, everything starts with a script. And if it's bad writing, you can't overcome bad writing. And the other big mistake Lucas made, I thought, was that he chose to direct the films himself. And by now, he'd been out of directing for so long. He hadn't directed since 1977. And, this is 22 years later. And there's been so many advances in technology. Acting is different. Actors are different. And I don't know why he stepped back into it and directed such a mess. The Phantom Menace is a mess. Everybody knows it. It was on my 10 best or 10 worst list that year. One of the 10 worst films of the year. And I stand by that. I hated it.
Credit where credit is due to some of the stuff you already mentioned. The pod race scene is pretty spectacular.
It is. I mean, you watch that and you realize the influence Ben-Hur obviously had on George Lucas. And it is a spectacular scene. It's beautifully shot and edited. But beyond that, I can't think of another moment in that movie where I went, wow. Well, not true, not true. The underwater world of the Gungas was pretty cool. I thought, wow, that's neat. We've been in outer space. Now we're going to underspace, which was pretty interesting. But
I al-
beyond that, not much else.
I'm a pretty big. I've always said that I think the prequels have the most interesting lightsaber fights, and the final three-way duel between Qui-Gon Jinn, Darth Maul, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is pretty well choreographed.
It is, but there's an inconsistency there because these stories happened before Star Wars and Empire and Return. So why would the lightsaber fights then be better than they should be in the future? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's no, it's a fair point.
Yeah, but they
I
were.
also, to this day, my favorite Jedi is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that's absolutely because of Ewan McGregor. He's the best
He
part
was
of
he
the
was
prequels.
terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. He was terrific. And when I say he sounded like Alec Guinness, Ewan McGregor has his own voice, and I've interviewed him, and he doesn't sound anything like Alec Guinness. But he worked on it, so he saw everything Alec Guinness made, and had that kind of, I don't even know what to call it, kind of a mumble mouth to his voice that Guinness has, and it worked. He channeled a young Alec Guinness.
And in Attack of the Clones, he there's a callback to the first appearance of Obi-Wan in A New Hope, the original Star Wars, where he's like, "Hello there," and
Yeah, yeah.
and you see young Obi-Wan drop down before he fights General Grievous. Like, "Hello there," and you're absolutely right. He does sound just like Alec Guinness, and
Sounds exactly like him.
he
Exactly.
evolves more into him as the trilogy progresses.
He
Uh,
does, especially in the third film. The second film I thought was worse than the first film, worse than the Phantom Menace.
yeah,
There was just so much technology and hardware going on, and it was almost a promotional reel for Industrial Light and Magic. There was no story there at all, and we get introduced to Hayden Christensen, who's going to play the young Anakin Skywalker, who will become Darth Vader, and 3,000 actors they look at, and this is who they came up with.
I've always wondered what it would have been like if Christian Bale played Anakin Skywalker.
Or anybody else, DiCaprio, anybody, but this guy. Christensen is a nice guy. You know, he lives near my hometown. He's got a farm there. I bumped into him a couple times. I interviewed him for the Star Wars film. He's a nice kid, a really nice kid, but not a shred of him suggests Darth Vader. There was zero chemistry between he and Natalie Portman, and I mean zero.
Right.
And it just, he was awful. And next to Ewan McGregor, he was embarrassing.
I couldn't agree more. Giving credit where credit is due, as I must for these prequels. I like Christopher Lee. And,
Yeah, he was great. He was great.
And again, back to the lightsaber fights. Watching Yoda bust out a lightsaber and start doing backflips kind of got me pretty excited. I'm not gonna lie.
That rocked. That rocked. I mean, my jaw hit the ground when Yoda pulled out a lightsaber, and I thought, well, this is going to be good.
Yeah.
But it was a very different Yoda from The Empire Strikes Back, because now it's CGI.
Right.
So, he could do anything to take nothing away from what he was in The Empire Strikes Back, but a very different Yoda in terms of movement, tone, all of it.
For
But
sure.
he rocks. He pulls out that lightsaber, man. He kicks ass.
The third installment of the prequel trilogy pays homage to the original title of Return of the Jedi and is called Revenge of the Sith.
Yes.
I think it's the best of the three.
I agree. I saw this again with the press, but just the press, thank God. And while I was watching it, I was thinking, wow, he actually is doing something with this film. It's actually saying something. I still think Christensen is all wrong as Anakin Skywalker. I don't believe him for a second. I think the scene where he walks in and kills the young kids is absolutely unbelievable. I don't believe for a minute that he would do that. He's got these ridiculous green eyes they put on him, and the stupid glare he uses. It was just bad. And Sam Jackson, what is Sam Jackson doing in these films? I mean, he stands out like a sore thumb, and he seemed almost constrained by the language. He couldn't start saying what he usually says in movies. You know, he's usually got a pretty foul mouth. There's
Right.
none of that in the Star Wars movies, and it's just unbelievable for him. Again, Portman, terrible, terrible. And she's one of the greatest actresses of her generation. Her performance as Jackie Kennedy is landmark good. She won an Academy Award for Black Swan. She was excellent in a film called Closer. But in this, she's just bad. She is just bloody god awful. And I've only seen her worse in one other film, and that was the 2006 film Goya's Ghosts, directed by Milos Forman, which is just bad beyond belief. Um, Obi-Wan cuts up Anakin, takes his legs off, and turns him into just a stump of a person. And the Emperor takes him back, puts on legs, puts on arms, gives him a breathing apparatus, and he becomes Darth Vader, which was great. All of a sudden, we get to see Darth Vader, and they turn on the breathing, and we hear that great breath that we're so familiar with. And he stands up, and they tell him that she has died. Natalie Portman has died. And he's got an absolutely ridiculous moment where he screams no. Oh, it's one of the most asinine moments in movie history. He did it, and as it was happening, you could see all the critics in the room bow their heads and just think, "Oh God, oh no, oh no." And
Realistic
but
reaction would have been him like going after trying to kill the emperor or something. That would
yeah,
have.
yeah, anything but what he did, anything. But as the trilogy goes, it is the best of them. Certainly the darkest. Some fantastic cinematography. The shots where Anakin and Vader are fighting are terrific. Anakin and Obi-Wan are fighting are absolutely terrific. That lava planet
Yeah, that's
was
the greatest
fantastic.
lightsaber fight I think in all the Star Wars movies. Bro. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, it's as far as like action packed goes. And again, Hugh McGregor's solid as a rock.
absolutely, absolutely. And the score, John Williams' score this time. The with Phantom Menace, it had been okay. With the next one, Attack of the Clones, again, it was okay. But here, he's got that sweeping dark majesty back in it,
Yeah.
and it was fantastic.
So eventually, Lucasfilm is sold to the Walt Disney Company, and they announced they're making a sequel trilogy. Many directors were considered for the episode 7, and even though he originally said he wasn't going to do it, and he had directed 2 Star Trek movies, they picked J.J. Abrams to do episode 7, which was eventually called The Force Awakens. And I remember I mentioned this, I think, on one of the last shows, seeing the trailer for The Force Awakens and being blown away beyond anything I had experienced in a movie trailer. When you see Han and Chewie, old and grizzled, on the bridge of the Millennium Falcon, and Han just smiles and says, "Chewie, we're home," and then boom, the logo comes up. I just like fell to my knees and was 10 years old again.
Yeah, they're playing on your sentimentality, and
And
Disney.
oh yeah, I know, and I'm eating it up totally.
Yeah, yeah. When Lucasfilm sold to Disney, I wasn't at all surprised. It was, one obscenely greedy human being, George Lucas, selling to the most greedy entity on the planet, which is Disney. And he sold the company for more money than his children's children's children will ever need. I mean, it's insane how much money George Lucas has. He's a billionaire 5 or 6 times over, and he could be doing good with that money. He could be making independent films. He could be helping out the people who were in his movies that are now broke. Paul Le Mat, who should have won an Academy Award for his performance as the hot rod driver in American Graffiti, is destitute. And Lucas could easily write him a check for 100 grand and help him out, and he won't. He just won't. He could be producing movies for younger directors. He could be making movies that that ennoble the art of cinema, which he used to say he was always going to do, but he's not doing it. When he had all kinds of money, he could have helped Francis Ford Coppola get out of debt. He could have financed The Godfather Part 3 and allowed Coppola to do what he wanted to do, and he didn't. He's never raised a finger to help any of his friends. He's just got wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, and like a miser, hid away at Skywalker Ranch and counts his gold. When he sold to Disney, I wasn't the least bit surprised. I wasn't surprised when Disney announced they were going to make another Star Wars series. Why wouldn't they? I
course.
mean, all they want to do is make money. They're going to make money with Star Wars. Didn't matter if it was good or bad. Those movies are critic proof. J.J. Abrams had the good sense to make The Force Awakenings good. Wasn't great, was good. And he was exactly the right director for it. He directed this one and the third one, and I thought did a very, very good job. He knocked it out of the park with Star Trek. He did the reboots for Star Trek with the younger cast, and they're wonderful films. I love those.
Me too. I was just watching the 2009 reboot yesterday.
Yeah, it's terrific. Yeah, on every level, it's terrific. He brought back Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher for this, and he cast Adam Driver as the new villain, the Darth Vader, so to speak, of this series. And that was great casting. Adam Driver's possibly the best actor of his generation, under 35 years old. I don't think anybody's better. And off they went to make the film. And there was a lot of familiarity in it, of course, but there was a new blood to it as well. Daisy Ridley, I think that's her name, the young
Yep.
woman that was cast as the heroine, as
Right.
the young woman, yeah, Ray. She's great. I mean,
She
she's absolutely phenomenal. Looks a little bit like Keira Knightley, but different too. And I thought it was gutsy of them to have a female heroine. You know, that was huge in a Star Wars film. There'd only ever been Leia, and now there was this gal, and she rocked it. And they just went in kind of a familiar direction, but different touches here and there all the way through it. And you're right. The moment that Harrison Ford and Chewbacca walk on the Falcon and say we're home, everybody sighed. Everybody, oh God, that's perfect. And it was perfect. Fanboys were weeping. I swear to Christ, they were sitting ahead of me a little bit, crying, watching it happen.
a lot
The
of
big
nostalgia.
surprise, pardon?
There's a lot of nostalgia. Like it's about new characters and it's a fresh take, but it's a lot of tugging on your familiarity and your heartstrings and stuff like that.
There
And it
is, and
worked.
I think they had to make it familiar, for the generations previous and for this generation to help this generation understand why it's such a beloved, iconic piece of work. And it did work. The Force Awakenings was hugely successful, made a ton of money, and brought Star Wars back into the American lexicon. The big surprise for me, and I didn't know it was going to happen, so spoiler, 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 was when Han Solo gets killed and his son kills him. I had no clue that was coming. I was shocked when it happened, and yet it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect because Harrison Ford didn't want to come back to do it. And the only way he would come back, we learned later, was if they killed him off. So they did. They did
I
do
saw
that.
that coming a mile away.
Did you? No, I didn't.
Oh yeah, because I knew about Harrison. I like as soon as that you see the catwalk and he goes out to confront, I'm like, he's gonna die.
Yeah.
I just knew it was gonna happen.
I
But
didn't
it
think
was
they'd
well
kill him. I thought, they're going to milk him for another sequel or two. They're going to keep him going and make him the grandfather of the Force or something. I don't know. I don't know.
It
It came out. It made a ton of money. Critics were relatively kind to it. It didn't suck, and that's what everybody hoped for. It was that it wouldn't be a terrible movie, and it wasn't a terrible movie. It was very entertaining, very familiar, a lot of fun. The new characters, Daisy Ridley especially, were charismatic and intriguing. The big question is, where was Luke Skywalker?
right,
That was the question of the day. Where was Luke?
and he only shows up in the very last scene. But yeah, I like the new young cast. I like John Boyega. I like Daisy Ridley. I like Oscar Isaac and Adam Driver. I thought they all played good parts. So
Oscar Isaac has got real charisma. He's a real gifted actor.
he's great.
And I almost thought him doing Star Wars was beneath him. But he looked absolutely at home. He looked like he was having a lot of fun doing it. And he's got charisma. He's got real heroic swagger. And it worked.
Yeah. So for episode 8, they hired Ryan Johnson to do the film, which would be titled The Last Jedi. Now, this one gets slammed a lot. I remember being quite pleasantly surprised with The Last Jedi. I thoroughly enjoyed it. What were your thoughts?
I liked it. One scene I laughed out loud, and I think it's one of the stupidest scenes I've ever seen in a Star Wars movie. And that's where Leia is in space and moves through space, doesn't freeze to death, and survives. And I just thought, you got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. And it was just such a Jar Jar Binks moment, so insipidly stupid. It took me right out of the movie. Overall, it's not bad. It's not bad. I mean, I was glad to see a little more Mark Hamill in it, and I liked that he looked beaten up and been living the life of a hermit and learned to live the life of a hermit. And whether he likes it or not is another matter. But I like that he almost becomes Yoda in a lot of ways, training Ridley. So you know, it has its moments. I like that that Adam Driver was more of a badass in this one than he was in the first one, but there's a connection between he and Daisy Ridley that was interesting. And will it make him a better man? Can it make him a better man? So that was left kind of ambiguous. But I didn't like it as much as the first one, and it's the weakest of the three, but it was okay.
I loved when Leia did the space thing.
Jesus, all I could think of was what are we? You know, where's David Bowie when you need him?
Fair enough. All right. Well, here's a couple of things that I really liked about The Last Jedi. Number one, I liked that they showed new stuff that the Force can do. That was interesting. The connection between Rey and Kylo Ren. I loved that Yoda was back and he was a puppet.
Yeah,
That was
I'm glad
really
they did away with the CGI shit. I was happy for that.
and the puppet looked like it had been sitting in Frank Oz's closet for 30 years. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, it looks so beat up and more. I love it. I also really liked, I'm not going to lie, I liked it even more when I found out how much the fanboys hated it.
Just to be contrary.
Yeah,
Just,
yeah.
just to be contrary, yeah.
But I also, for the very first time in my life, I remember leaving the theater after seeing a Star Wars movie, and I'm like, I don't know where the story goes now.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that
it
was
kind of
kind
did
of
leave you hanging like that. Yeah, it kind of did leave you up in the air as to where it was going to go because of what happened with Luke. I mean, where do we go from here? What happens now?
yeah, and
And
I
it was that
loved Mark Hamill.
he was terrific in it. And Mark Hamill, as a young guy, wasn't much of an actor, but you know, he went away to Broadway after Star Wars, and he starred in The Elephant Man. And he says that's where he became a real actor. And he was in a pretty decent war movie called The Big Red One, and made some other, you know, some interesting off-Broadway plays, even A Few Good Men on Broadway. And then came back for this. And by now he's aged, and he's like Clint Eastwood. He grew into a better actor. Clint Eastwood wasn't a good actor in the 70s, not at all. But by the time he got to Unforgiven, he was magnificent, absolutely magnificent. And you know, I wouldn't give Mark Hamill that much credit, but he was certainly very, very good.
He's a legendary voice actor. Many people consider him the quintessential Joker. He's voiced the character for over 20 years
Yeah,
against
yeah.
Kevin Conroy's Batman. What else was I going to say? Yeah, yeah, kind of to be a contrarian. I liked it. I saw it with a buddy of mine who was a Star Wars fan, an old friend of mine, and we both left and we're like, that was good. It was new. It was like, we don't know where it goes now. And then I went home and I read all the stuff of like fanboys go, the Force can't do that. And I was like, the Force is magic. It can do whatever the screenwriter wants it to do. And so the fact that it pissed off so many purists kind of made me like it a little more.
Gotta like fanboys, you know. I just sort of tune them out.
Yeah. So Colin Trevorrow, director of Jurassic World, was originally supposed to direct the third installment of the sequel trilogy, but that fell through, and they eventually ended up getting J.J. Abrams back to do The Rise of Skywalker, which had a couple of jobs it needed to do. It was a lot. It needed to provide a lot of good fan service and tie up loose ends, and I think it kind of successfully did that.
I think so too. I think J.J. Abrams is the real deal. I think he's a fine director. And I watched Rise of Skywalker with real trepidation, thinking they're either going to do it or they're going to blow it. And they did it. They absolutely did it. I loved where the story of Kylo and Rey went. I thought that was absolutely perfect that he gives his life for her. I thought that was beautiful. I liked that Harrison Ford came back for the little cameo.
Yes.
Had a lovely scene with Adam Driver. I thought that was beautiful.
You know
I
what?
love that they tied up the loose ends with Leia. Because I started to wonder: are we seeing Carrie Fisher, or are we seeing CGI Carrie Fisher? What are we seeing? Because she died.
It was unused
Mm.
footage for the most part that they shot for the
A lot
Force
of it,
Awakens.
yeah, yeah.
And they
But I
kind of
mean,
wrote scenes around
they had
her.
done that before. They did that with Gladiator with Oliver Reed. You never really knew if you were seeing Oliver Reed or a CGI Oliver Reed or an actor shot from behind being it. So I was glad they tied that up. Again, I like that Daisy Ridley was front and center. She's very much the hero of the film, and holds it. I mean, this movie's really on the shoulders of that young woman, and she held it together. She did absolutely terrific. The special effects were fantastic. That scene when all the ships from the galaxy have come to fight the Empire is just phenomenal. My jaw hit the ground when I saw that. And a lot of good things in it. It's not a masterpiece. It wasn't one of the 10 best films of the year, but it was a solid entertainment from beginning to end. And
It did what
I
it
was
had
I
to
was
do.
good with it.
Yeah, it accomplished what it needed to. The what I liked about the special effects was that we're nine. I mean, we're going to discuss the two anthology films after this just briefly, but we're over 10 films in now, and I'm seeing stuff with these big action shots that I'd never seen before. When Oscar Isaac, is jumping to light speed in bursts and then slowing down and speeding up. I'm like, well, that's new. That's really cool. I haven't seen
Yeah.
that before.
Yeah.
Bringing back Billy D. Williams, a little bit of fan service there. Seeing him flying the Falcon with Chewie and laughing, that was fun. Oh God, I lost my train of thought here. What was I going to say?
20, 30 years in movies, and Billy D. Williams still can't act. He can't put a line of dialogue that sounds natural. He's
because
just a hack.
Wookiees stand out in a crowd. Yeah, I know what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
just awful.
I remember thinking when Kylo Ren killed Han Solo, and all throughout the second film, I'm like, I don't know how the fuck they're gonna redeem Ben Solo, and because the audience is never gonna forgive him for killing Han Solo, and
Right.
and they brought back Han Solo for that one scene, and they managed to allow us to forgive him because Han forgave him.
Yeah.
That was a stroke of genius. That was my favorite part of the movie, the Harrison Ford cameo for sure.
It was a wonderful moment when Driver looks at him and he starts to say dad, and Harrison Ford knows that he's trying to say he's sorry.
Yeah.
And he just looks at him dead in the eye, as only Harrison Ford can do, and says, I know. It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. One of the high points of the third trilogy, I thought.
And it was a callback to Empire when Leia said, I love you, and he said, I know.
Yeah, yeah.
So we got to talk a little bit about the two anthology films. The second one we're going to butt heads on because I know we're diametrically opposed to it. But I saw Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which takes place before the events of the first movie and follows a team of people who steal the plans for the Death Star, which is incorporated into the original film's script. I thought this was a cool little movie set in the Star Wars universe. I thought it was pretty satisfying. When I saw Darth Vader kick ass at the end, I forgot Hayden Christensen ever existed.
Yeah.
And
I thought it was a good movie. I enjoyed it. I liked that it took a Star Wars universe and kind of expanded on it. But while I was watching it, I just kept wondering, is it necessary? Is it a necessary movie?
no.
And I don't think it was. I really don't think it was. It didn't really add anything to the story of the main narrative. I love Claire Foy, the actress. I think she's spectacular. And again, I like that a woman was the heroine. But I think it was made to make money. And again, that sickens me with Disney because they've got more money than God. And I don't know when enough is enough. But as a film, like you, I was thoroughly entertained. I haven't seen it since. I haven't thought about it till this moment. So
Sorry, I gotta correct you, John. It's Felicity Jones, not Claire Foy.
Felicity Jones. I'm sorry. You're right.
No worries. it was interesting. I remember seeing it with my girlfriend at the time. Grand Moff Tarkin showed up, and I leaned over to her and I said, "You see that guy there?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "He is entirely CGI." She's like, "What?" And she's like,
Yep.
how do you know that?" And I'm like, "I'll explain after the movie."
He's
She didn't
been
know.
dead for 30 years.
I'm
That's how
like,
I
Peter Cushing. Yeah, Peter Cushing has been dead since 1994, and he definitely didn't film any of this. Um, I hope that doesn't become too much of a thing.
Well, for one, they're going to have to get permission from the family,
Right.
you know, and I don't know why Cushing's family did it, other than they must have had a good payday. Once again, Disney's got deep pockets, they can do it. Or did Lucas own the rights? Because when someone signs with Lucas, they sign their soul away.
I think
So
that
did Lucas own the rights to his identity? Who knows? Who knows?
I think that's it. I remember. I think it might have been when Lucas got the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award or something. Carrie Fisher went up, told a joke about how every time she looks at herself in the mirror, she has to write George Lucas a check for a couple of bucks.
She was great. She was such a funny woman, you know.
Yeah, yeah. What was it? She said she wanted her obituary to say she drowned in moonlight, strangled by her own bra. I think that was it.
Yeah, yeah. When she was
Yeah.
younger, she was in Shampoo with Warren Beatty, and she was smoking hot. She was gorgeous. She was little. She was really tiny, but just a spectacular figure and body. And I really thought she'd have a big career as an ingenue or a bad girl, something.
Yeah.
And she played the nut job in the Blues Brothers, you know, the one that's trying to kill one of the Blues Brothers.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, she's going to do it. And then it never happened. She got into drugs, and her life just fell apart.
I got really choked up. I think it was in the credits of I think it was in the credits of The Last Jedi where it says in loving memory of our princess Carrie Fisher.
Yeah, I felt bad the day she died, genuinely bad.
Me too, man.
You know, because she had come so far. You know, she became a writer, and a damn good writer, and did some one-woman shows about her career, and would look at herself with absolute honesty, look at the drugs and the addiction, and talk about it. And so few people have the guts to do that, but she did, and made a career out of it. People forget that Postcards from the Edge with Meryl Streep and Shirley MacLaine is her life with her mother. They forget that. You know, that's very real.
All right. Fasten your seatbelts, listeners, because John and I are about to go toe to toe on the one we disagree completely on. Let's talk about Solo. Go.
Piece of shit. Absolute piece of shit from top to bottom. Probably the most unnecessary movie made in that year. I don't know what Ron Howard was doing. Every once in a while, Ron Howard makes a great movie. Apollo 13, The Missing, Frost Nixon, knocks it out of the park. And from then, his movies are either average or shit. And this was shit, the bottom of the fucking barrel. The guy that played Solo had zero chemistry. And, you know, had they cast Chris Pratt, they would have had a guy that could maybe have as much charisma as Harrison Ford had. But this guy had zero chemistry. He didn't have any of the sardonic wit. He didn't have any of the cynicism. He didn't have any of the danger that Han Solo suggested or Harrison Ford suggested. It was just junk from beginning to end. And again, the whole time I'm watching it, saying Disney's just getting richer, and that's why this movie exists. It had no business being made in any way, shape, or form. And it's in my file with The Godfather Part 3. It was never made. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, I really liked it. I I think this all comes down to whether or not you buy the actor playing Han. Well, obviously you don't. I did. I liked Donald Glover as Lando. I had a small checklist of things I wanted to see in that movie. I wanted to see the bromance with Chewbacca, how he won the ship, the Kessel Run. Yeah, I don't know. But it was the last of the anthology series. Disney decided to stop making them after that. So I guess
Mercifully,
I guess more people are on your side than mine.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I had one thing on my checklist that I wanted to see in this movie, and that was the words "the end."
Yeah,
That's it.
fair enough. Now with Disney Plus, Jon Favreau's serial western in the Star Wars universe, The Mandalorian, has finished the first season, and we're gonna get 2 more. I know you. I don't think you've gotten around to checking it out.
I have not.
I watched it.
I will not subscribe to Disney. I won't.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's pretty cool. Jon Favreau's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing, and
Good director, no question. Good filmmaker.
yeah. As far as Star Wars on the big screen, I don't think there are any immediate plans to do any more movies. I really don't know what's going to happen, but it is Disney, so something's going to come, I'm sure. I mean, they got the theme park going at Disney World now, and it's too much of a cash cow to just let go completely.
I predict within 5 years, Nick, they will remake the first Star Wars.
Really?
They will go back and they will remake Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Yep.
All right. Well, that's a horrible idea.
Yep, it is, but they'll do it. And they'll make money doing it too. And that's all that matters. That would be critic proof. Doesn't matter if they're good or bad. They'll make a fortune. Because every fanboy or grandson of fanboy or great-grandson of fanboy will be in line to see that film. And it doesn't matter what we say about it.
Well, thanks to our listeners for tuning in. We hope you enjoy this. Have a blessed May the 4th, and may the Force be with you. John, thanks for talking to us, and
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Okay, take care.
There you have it, folks. Episode number 17. May the 4th be with us. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in. Be sure to check us out on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, especially our YouTube channel. Click like and subscribe for this, all past and future episodes of the podcast. Got a lot of cool stuff coming up. We're doing an expose on the 1980s in cinema. It might take a few episodes. It's turned out to be a long one. Alan and I are going to sit down and talk about Lucille Ball. Going to do an episode on Tom Cruise. That plus a whole lot more. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Till next time, we'll see you at the movies.